Thank you. So here's a question for you. How can we get that movie into all the TV networks, to theaters? How can we get that out here?
Is this on?
Yes.
We've been turned down by HBO, Showtime, PBS. We've been trying to get the film distributed by all the big networks. We ran a 1-hour version of the film, was run on 30 or 40 PBS stations, but it's a boring distinction, but an important one. It wasn't an official PBS film. It was provided by a third party as content for PBS stations to run it if they chose. And the results of that was that plenty of people ran it, but it had zero marketing. And when there's zero marketing, you might as well not even run the film because no one knows it's coming and no one just makes the time to see it. So that had a tiny little ripple of an effect. So we're still seeking wide distribution in this country anyway.
Thank you. And one more question for you before we go to the next questions. Was the Sundance Independent Film Festival contacted, and what was their reaction to the film?
Yes. We sent the film to Sundance with their encouragement. One of our colleagues who was a consultant on the film has a big position at the Sundance Film Festival, and she said she'd talk to her friends. And the reviewer who looked at it actually emailed us on the QT and said she thought it was a fantastic film and it was one of the better films that she'd seen, and that it was too political for Sundance. And of course we did not get in, so.
Okay. This question is, I think, for Rula. A lot of these questions are for Rula here. I asked an LA Times reporter, how can he participate in the distortion of the news? He said, if I can get them to leave 10% of my copy uncensored, it is worthwhile to continue. Please comment. And maybe that goes for all of you. Do you want to fill it? Do you want to start? Okay. So
the LA Times reporter made that statement,
yeah,
that if he can get his editors to leave
10% of it uncensored, it's worthwhile to continue. Did you find censorship?
That's a good ratio, No, I mean, censorship, self-censorship, it's part of media life. I mean, if we could get away with 10% on this issue, we'd revolutionize America. I mean, right now, it's like it's a 90% censorship ratio. So give it to me, 10%. I love it. I mean, I just want to reflect. When I was at the New York Times Magazine, I did a.
Yeah, I say the opposite. 90% is censored.
Oh, 90%.
When I was at the New York Times Magazine, I did a cover story on the gun lobby, and I wrote a very long article sending up the NRA and talking about their sexual fetishization of guns and everything else. And you've never seen an article in the New York Times Magazine about the Israel lobby with 1/10 of that kind of free speech involved. So.
Yeah, there's a cozy relationship. I mean, one of the reasons that made me actually in 2014 do what I did on MSNBC was, these officials would be, Israeli officials would be like 99% of the time, and they would never be challenged as the documentary represent. They would never be asked about the occupation or the siege, or it's like, I remember I almost choked on my coffee one morning, and I was watching Schiefer interviewing Bibi Netanyahu, and in the end of the interview, obviously it was softball questions like, Mr. Prime Minister, how do you feel? Is it safe in Tel Aviv? And he was bombarding and pounding Gaza. And in the end, he said, like the former Prime Minister of Israel said, we will never forgive the Arabs for forcing us to kill their children. And I looked at the television and said, is this, sorry my language, is this a fucking joke? I mean, I was horrified, and I went to my network, and that morning, One of our journalists, one of the best one we ever had, a reporter who covered the Gaza war in 2012, was Ayman Muhiddin. And he just filmed 3 kids killed on a beach. He just filmed it. I was in the TV station, and I saw the panic. Because suddenly, there's one story, and it's a major story that was filmed on camera, where you see the missile striking, the first one, killing the first 2, and then the second missile, and this kid is running after, they were actually playing football on the beach. And the third kid, 6-year-old, running, and the second missile come and strike him. And you couldn't explain that. You could there's no justification to this. The telephone start, ringing, and the justification that there was a missile there, and they kept calling, producers kept calling Ayman Muhiddin, are you sure there was another missile in the area? And he said, no, every journalist was there. We watched it, we filmed it, it's on film. You had 3-4 cameras there. That story was taken from him, given to another one who wasn't even in Gaza. He was in Tel Aviv. He just arrived. And he was actually called out of Gaza because he witnessed that moment. I went on air, and I was with Ronan Farah, and I said, our coverage is not only disgustingly biased, it's a disgrace. We're betraying the American people because we're basically not telling them the whole story. We're lying bluntly to them. My every show was canceled, and I left the building knowing that I will never come back. And leaving the building, I remember some of the producer stopping me. They said, well, you don't understand the kind of bullying and harassment and attention. Recently, somebody from, I will not mention name, from the Washington Post was telling me that every article they write, they have to answer to lobbyists and organizations like Camera. And I said, I don't care what kind of harassment, you just stand up to it. Basically, you stand up to it. So when I submit an article and they tell me, and look, supposedly I'm an Arab Muslim black woman telling these nice white guys in these networks, you can't handle a little bit of bullying. I mean, you're in the wrong job. Probably you're not only in the wrong job. If you can't stand up to these thugs, then they will get away with it. They will get away over and again. I am so grateful and thankful that independent organizations exist, like Mondowise and Alternet, and I mean, now, and these kind of documentary. And what I'm asking all of you, and forgive me if I am shameless about it, we need to support these organizations. These are independent organizations that live on donations. Whatever philanthropy you're doing, this is the ultimate battleground. Whatever you're doing, I will be like Sanders. $7, whatever that is, give it to Mondowise, to Alternet, to Catherine to promote her movie, because this will change America forever, will change the public opinion. You know what? When Rupert Murdoch wanted to buy Reuters the first time, and the legal system was clear in the UK, the first thing he said, and he retracted what he said, I don't buy newspapers. And that was a lie, obviously. He said that he used to buy journalists. Guess what? We can actually shift the public opinion. If they put $100 million on one end to manipulate the public opinion, you can put much less, because one footage like that can really shift the public opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for maybe one more question, or should we close the door here? This was more about what you started out talking about, the email exchange. Do you want to talk more about that? That was uncovered, by the way, in a FOIA request made by Grant Smith, and he found it accidentally. And that's a kind of thing that it appalled us when we read it, and it's Would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
I mean, again, I'm really grateful that we expose this, disgusting misogyny. And again, I love when white men lecture me or lecture others about how we go in the Middle East and we invade certain countries to liberate women and women's choices. And then CNN put against me somebody like Rabbi Shmuley. And forgive me if I'm about to throw up. And he's telling me that an Arab woman like myself would never... He's patronizing me about my rights. Basically, they look down at the Middle East, at Arabs, and we're, when I wrote my New York column about minority rights or minority lives in Israel, the only way we're described as Arab Muslims, women, or brown, as either a terrorist or a Bedouin without a nationality. In American media, we're basically, every question starts where like, how do you feel? As if my job is to feel. My job is to analyze phenomena. Whether I look, my description, whether I'm tall or short, whether I'm big or small, it does not matter. Whether I look like this or I had some plastic surgery to look like this, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, it's about the argument. And since I start working, everything we predicted about the trajectory of the war on terror, the Iraqi war, that it will be, if you listen to whatever any Arab analysts have told you about the war on terror, about invading Iraq, how it will create mass radicalization, will destabilize the entire region, and will basically bring, we had only 200 jihadists after 9/11. Only 200. According to the FBI, there were only 200. Today, we have hundreds of thousands of, if that is a success, then what is failure? So every Arab analyst has been saying the same thing. And what is their weapon to throw against people like me? Oh, yeah, her looks. Give me a break. I mean, you know what? It didn't hit me, but it explained, I think, to the public a mindset of these thugs and bullies. I'm used to it because I had that in Italy, and I'm exercised because I had ministers in Italy refusing to answer questions because I was a Muslim or I was brown or some kind of things. I mean, I remember interviewing Berlusconi in 2005 the first time. I mean, usually it's hard for me to lose. I mean, I have no comment on the kind of, if you think Berlusconi was bad, imagine when Donald Trump will come up there and will start dealing with journalists. He's already saying, oh, these disgusting people, I hate them, and whatever. I mean, with the kind of attitude that I seen under Berlusconi for 10 years was this kind of things, where people, basically women and men who worked for him, would call us and threaten us. Threats, real threats. In a country that killed journalists, actually, these threats can happen. And people, I believe that when you somehow use violent words, this can easily translate it into real violence and killing. It can easily translate into that. And that's why, again, forgive me for repeating the same thing. We need to create an ecosystem that collaborate much more with each other, that reinforce each other, and that actually, we have to create a glue, a cultural glue that reinforce, and a tissue that reinforce and push back harder. Because I'm sorry, we're not pushing back harder enough, because these thugs are bullies and will throw everything they have, from threats to bullying to harassment to even beating of some journalists. But we live in an era where democracy, luckily, still function. So before it collapses, let's hold it together. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to remind you that Rula will be signing her book at the reception afterwards. And I'm also going to have a comment from Ralph Nader, who said that he'd sure like this audience to know that Al Arabiya News was not allowed to cover AIPAC's convention. They denied Al Arabiya access to the AIPAC.
Wise, if I'm not wrong,
Yeah,
and I'm sure they will deny 80% of the people sitting here. It's not
they
a
did deny
dialogue.
us
I mean,
too.
what's happening
Yeah.
in AIPAC on Monday will not be a dialogue. It will be a monologue, and it's like, I mean, I obviously I have a Catholic daughter, so I go to church with her sometimes, and I see how they, the way they pray, and I feel like when all of these politicians go to pray to AIPAC, it's just like genuflection, and please kill me more or give me whatever you want. It's it's painful for somebody that believe in a democratic system and travel around the world and seen millions of people standing in the street from Cairo to Algeria to Tunisia, people willing to die for the principle of democracy and equality because they feel like they were born as free men and women. And this is the kind of model they look up to. And what they see on television, they see AIPAC basically squeezing, sorry my language, the balls of these people. And these people are basically saying, yes, please, more again.
Okay, thank you very much.